A love letter romance. A story which you guys will always remember. In a small apartment in Fort Worth, Texas, Kasara Collins has signed up to become a letter-writing member of encouragement for the soldiers. Kasara is a beautiful woman, standing 5 feet 6 inches, with shoulder-length dark brown hair, brown eyes, a shapely curvy body, and a cafe au lait complexion that told of a multicultural background. She was working as a writer in a nonprofit organization that sends letters to soldiers that are in different branches of the military. The goal is to offer support, encouragement, and kind words to let each soldier know that they are appreciated and that many are grateful for the sacrifices that they have made. She is working on her first letter, but is having trouble as she does not know what to say. The soldier that she will be corresponding with is Lieutenant David Axeson, who is stationed in Afghanistan. After going through so many sheets of notebook paper, she finally gives up for the time being, getting up from her desk and walking towards the sliding glass door that leads out to the balcony. She opens the door and steps outside and takes a seat on the wicker love seat that has light blue cushions. As she looks up at the afternoon sky and then down at the parking lot of the apartment complex that she lives in, she sighs. Her life was ordinary. She went to work at the law office, where she is an office assistant. After work, she would come home, change out of her work clothes and into shorts or lounge pants, depending on the season, and a simple t-shirt. She would either read, watch TV and/or movies, or surf the net, or maybe even write up a poem or essay on her computer. Oftentimes, she would write short stories that range from comedy drama romances to supernatural suspense mysteries. Suddenly, her smartphone rang, and she went inside to answer it, closing the sliding glass door behind her. She walked over to the end table that is next the purple velour love seat and saw that it was her best friend and cousin, Carmina. She answered it. "Yes, cuzzy," she said. "What?" "No, hello, cuz," said Carmina. I smiled. "Hello, Carmina. How are you doing, Carmina?" "What do I owe to this phone call, Carmina?" "I thought you were in Montreal," she said. "I am. I'm just calling to say hello. I can't just call and talk to my favorite cuzzy," said Carmina. "Of course you can. However, I would think as one of the top travel photographers/writers, I thought that you wouldn't have time to make social phone calls," said Kasara. "Just because I am always busy doesn't mean that I cannot make time," she said. "True," said Kasara. "So, what are you up to, Cass?" Carmina asked. "Well, I have joined a letter-writing organization called Encouragement for the Soldiers. I am going to be writing to a soldier who is stationed in Afghanistan. However, I have no idea of what to say," said Kasara. Said Carmina. "Maybe do some research on Afghanistan and the culture and talk about that," she suggested. Kasara raised an eyebrow. Cuz I have a feeling that might not be what he wants to read in a letter," she said. "It was just a suggestion," said Carmina. Kasara shook her head. "Next suggestion, please," she said. Soon there came a knock at her door, and she walked over. She looked through the peephole, and she smiled. "Crazy blonde," she said through the door, and Carmina started to laugh. Kasara heard laughing outside the door as she put Carmina on speaker. "That's right, I'm here. Now open the door before I blow it down," said the woman behind the door. Kasara and Carmina laughed. "This is not the story of the 3 little pigs, and you're certainly not the big bad wolf," said Kasara. "More like bad big crazy chick," said Carmina. Kasara laughed as she opened the door. In walked Nadine Bardine, Kasara's other best friend. Nadine is also married to Brandon Collins, Kasara and Carmina's cousin. Nadine has light golden blonde hair that reaches to the midsection of her back, eyes that are blue-green, and a fair complexion with a few freckles that didn't detract from her looks. She and Kasara are the same height, and like Kasara, she is curvy, just slightly less. "Hello, Nad," Carmina said on the phone. "Hey, Mina, are you still in Montreal?" Nadine asked. "Yes, I am. I'll be here for 2 weeks," said Carmina. Suddenly, the phone beeped on Carmina's end. "I gotta go. I'll call you later, Cass and Nad," she said. "Later," Kasara and Nadine said as Kasara hung up. "So what ya doing?" Nadine asked as she smiled. I am trying to write a letter, said Kasara as she closed the door and walked over to the love seat. Who are you writing to? Nadine asked. I joined a letter-writing organization called Encouragement for the Soldiers. The soldier that I am writing to is a Marine. His name is Lieutenant David Axeson, said Kasara. Ooh, the name sounds sexy, said Nadine. Kasara just shook her head as she snickered at Nadine's comment. What? Said Nadine as she shrugged her shoulders. Only you, said Kasara as she laughed. Well, it does, she said. Have you started on the letter? Nadine asked. Well, I have been trying. However, I don't know what to say. I've gone through probably between 10 to 15 sheets of notebook paper trying to write my first letter to him, said Kasara as she placed her smartphone on the table. Here's idea. Hello, Lieutenant Axeson. My name is Kasara Collins. I am 31 years old. I am from Fort Worth, Texas. I am single, ready to mingle, and I think your name is sexy, Nadine said with a smile. Kasara just laughed as she dropped her head and palmed her face. Hey, it's an idea. You don't have to use it, said Nadine as she smiled. Kasara lifted up her head to look at Nadine as she continued to laugh. This is why Brandon married you. You are completely nuts, said Kasara as she continued to laugh. Nadine just continued to smile. But you know what? Your silliness has helped to ease my writer's block. So I do thank you for that. Crazy woman, said Kasara as she finally calmed down. Always glad to help, said Nadine. So aside from that, are you here for a social visit? Kasara asked. Actually, I was wondering if you would like to go with me to the farmer's market. It's Saturday, and I thought you would like to get out of the apartment for a while, said Nadine. Why not? I could pick up a few things. I found a recipe online for a mushroom and veal dish, and I want to try it, said Kasara as she went into her bedroom, slipped on her black wedge sandals, and grabbed her purse. Awesome, said Nadine, and she and Kasara exited the apartment. That night, the veal and mushroom recipe that Kasara tried was partially successful. While it came out looking wonderful, the taste was not to her liking. Maybe with a few more tries and tweaks, it would be great. After dinner, Kasara went straight to her desk, sat down, and opened her spiral notebook to try once again writing that letter. Despite Nadine's idea, Kasara felt that telling Lieutenant Axeson that his name sounded sexy was much too forward and sounded desperate. After milling over in her head of what she would write, she took a deep breath and relaxed. She grabbed her pen, thankful that it was erasable ink, and just started writing. 2. Location: South Asia, Afghanistan. A large military camp of Marines. Inside of each large tent is a platoon of 50 Marines. In these tents, some are huddled in a corner throwing dice, some are playing cards, others are either reading, writing, or listening music. Soon a small truck arrives. Mail call, said the driver as he and others got out of the truck and walked to the back and hopped into bed of the truck. The soldiers walked out of their tents and gathered around the truck. Borman, the soldier called out. Right here, said the soldier as he walked up to the truck and got his mail. Casey, another soldier in the bed of the truck, called out. Here, said the soldier as she walked up to the truck and took her package. One by one, each soldier's name was called out. Axeson, said the soldier. The soldiers parted ways as a tall man with a clean-shaven head, a blonde goatee, a warm beige complexion, and blue eyes walked up to the truck. He was definitely an imposing man, and the soldiers showed him respect. Right here, he said as he held out his hand. He was given a letter, which he took, and then he walked away from the truck. Why is everyone so afraid of him? One soldier asked. It's not about fear. It's respect. That man there, Lieutenant Axeson, he's seen some shit, and I mean terrible shit. Not to mention he's been shot at, stabbed, and even taken hostage, but he escaped. He's one tough son of a bitch, said another soldier. Lieutenant David Axeson, born in the UK, came to the US when he and his brother were 10 years old. He had definitely seen some shit during his tenure in the Marines. Although tough as nails, many don't see the vulnerable side of him, the side that is caring, loving, and spiritual. Every night, he prays not just for himself, but everyone, especially those in his platoon. He walks back into the tent that he shares with the rest of his platoon and lays back on his bunk bed, propped up against the metal headboard, cushioned by a pillow. He looks at the letter and sees that it is from the U.S. and is part of the encouragement for the soldiers' organization. He opens the letter and reads it. Dear Lieutenant David Axeson, I am Kasara Collins from Fort Worth, Texas. I have just recently joined the encouragement for the soldiers, and your name was given to me as the soldier to correspond with. I don't know what I can say that doesn't sound cliché, as I can imagine that you've heard the standard thank you for your service. I have often been told to simply write what your heart tells you. Well, I will admit that I had to dig deep into my heart, and when I did that, I still didn't know what to write. Finally, after chatting with a nutty friend of mine, I got the inspiration to sit down, relax, and let the words come to me. So, here goes, fair warning. It's quite simple and hopefully not cliché. I pray that God is with you and your fellow soldiers every step of the way. That you and your fellow soldiers are safe. I hope that despite the war and hostile surroundings that you feel blessed. I pray that when you and your fellow soldiers are able to return to civilization, that not only that you are thanked, but also able to have a normal life. Although I will admit that I feel that the term normal is slightly overused nowadays, as normal is not the same for everyone. Be blessed, Lieutenant Axeson, and I hope to hear from you soon. Stay safe, and God bless you. Sincerely, Kasara Collins. David smiled after reading the letter. It was definitely not like the other letters that he had gotten before. Letters that ranged from the cliché, thank you for your service, from well-meaning yet slightly oblivious people who watch the news practically every night, to the desperate, lonely, and bored women who either have the typical fuck a soldier fantasy or make the honeyed half-sincere promise of taking care of him when he is discharged. Kasara's letter was breath of fresh air, finally a letter that was genuine and one that he was looking forward to replying. Hey, Lieutenant. Briggs and Foreman are at it again, said a soldier as he rushed in. Damn it, he said as he got up from his bunk and rushed outside the tent. Two soldiers were engaged in a physical altercation. It wasn't the first time that these soldiers had traded blows. A gathering of soldiers surrounded them. Most were cheering them on, others were trying to talk some sense into them. David pushed his way through and made it to the center of the gathering. Instead of getting between the soldiers, he took out his gun, pointed it to the left, above everyone's head, and fired 2 shots. Those shots got everyone's attention, including the combatants. The show's over. Any protests, you will find yourself sleeping outside, on the cold, hard ground, he said as he looked at every soldier. None of them said a word. I am going to assume by the deafening silence that all of you understand, said David. Clear out, he ordered, and all the soldiers scattered. He walked up to the 2 soldiers who had been fighting. The 2 of you have one more time, and then I will personally see to it that both of you are sent to the front line where you will have to deal with more than your fucking clashing egos, said David. This bullshit stops now. Do I make myself clear? He said loudly. Yes, sir, the soldier said. Get back your tents and clean yourselves up, said David. The soldiers saluted him and quickly hurried off. David made his way back to the tent and collapsed on his bunk. He said a small prayer and then sat up, grabbing a sheet of paper and a pencil, and started to write. 3. The week had not been the best for Kasara. Her car had broken down, and one of her bosses blamed her for an error that someone else made. Despite being told that someone else made the error, the boss didn't apologize, prompting Kasara to make it a point to avoid that boss as much as possible. By the end of the week, her car was fixed, but someone tried to break into it. Kasara sarcastically joked if it was to steal the car itself. The car isn't worth much since it was a used 2012 Toyota Camry. If it was to steal anything inside the car, the only thing that was worth stealing was the radio, as she kept nothing of actual value in her car. Thankfully, the only damage was a small dent. As she pulled into the parking lot of the building of where her unit was located, she saw the face of her dreaded neighbor, Ms. Gates. The overly paranoid elderly woman caused no end of trouble for Kasara and the other residents. For some reason, she singled out Kasara as her main target. Kasara had learned to ignore her, As she got out of her car and locked it up, Kasara cautiously walked towards the cluster of mailboxes. "Where is that hoodlum that you are always hanging around with?" Ms. Gates asked. Kasara assumed that Ms. Gates was talking about her cousin, Brandon, who, along with Nadine, would often visit. As Kasara got her mail and looked through it, she ignored Ms. Gates. "You need to stop playing music so loudly too. I cannot have peace and quiet with you playing loud music," said Ms. Gates. Kasara continued to say nothing as she locked up her mailbox and headed towards her unit. "I'm also going to make a report about an illegal animal that you have in your apartment. You know damn well that pit bulls are not allowed here," Ms. Gates said as she narrowed her eyes at Kasara as she quickly walked past her. Kasara shook her head as Ms. Gates had no clue of what she was talking about. Kasara doesn't have a pit bull or any pet for that matter, and when she did listen to music, she always plugged in her headphones. Kasara made it into her apartment and quickly closed the door and locked it as Ms. Gates continued her ranting, this time about punk rock music being horrible. "That woman needs to be in a senior living apartment complex," said Kasara as she placed her mail on the kitchen table. Suddenly, there was a pounding on the door and Kasara sighed as she knew who it was. Kasara didn't open the door. She just merely went into her bedroom and called apartment security, which she and other residents have done many times when Ms. Gates would get out of line. A few minutes later, Kasara heard a gentler knock on her door. She exited her bedroom and walked to the door and looked through the peephole to see that it was apartment security, and she opened the door. "Hello," said Kaf. "Hello, I wanted to let you know that Ms. Gates has been taken to the hospital for a psych evaluation as she just attacked us," said the security guard. Kasara's eyes widened at hearing this. "Well, thank you. I hope that she will be okay," she said. "So, do we? Good day, miss," said the security guard as she turned and went down the steps. Kasara closed the door and locked it. "Perhaps a senior living apartment complex wouldn't be good for her either," she said as she took a deep breath and exhaled. Having changed into beige capris and a loose-fitting black top, Kasara walked over to the kitchen table and once again looked over her mail. She spotted an envelope that was from Afghanistan. At the top was encouragement for the soldiers. She took a deep breath as she walked over to the love seat, sat down and opened the envelope and took out the letter and read it. "Dear Kasara Collins, thanks for your letter. You're right, thank you for your service. Gets old after a while. It's nice to hear from someone who gets it, who understands that normal might be a bit out of reach for a while, but still wishes us the best. Your prayers mean a lot, Kasara. Out here, faith is what keeps us going sometimes. Knowing someone back home is thinking of us, that makes a difference. Your letter was quite uplifting and brought a bright light to my surroundings as it is very hostile here. I have gotten many letters with the cliche, thank you for your service letters, which are great, but nothing that speaks of genuine encouragement. Other letters that I have gotten have been from, how do I put this politely, women who are bored, lonely, and or desperate. Everything from promising to take care of me when I am discharged to wanting to meet me at a hotel in any city for a few days when I have leave so we could have fun, if you get my meaning. Your letter was refreshing and definitely brought a smile to my face. And, as I said, brought a bright light to my surroundings. I want you to know that I do pray for myself and for my fellow soldiers every night. I do feel that it has helped me get through some of the most roughest events that I have endured during my tour. I hope that you continue to pray for me and my fellow soldiers, and I will also pray for you as I feel that you are a kind soul. God bless you, and I hope to hear from you again. Sincerely, Lieutenant David Axeson." The letter made Kasara smile and even brought tears to her eyes. As she looked up from the letter, a day that seemed dim just became brighter. She felt good as she said a small prayer, not only for herself and her family and friends, but also for David and his fellow soldiers. So what does he look like?" Nadine asked. Kasara gave Nadine a puzzled look as Brandon just snickered. Brandon stood 6 feet 1 inch, with wavy black hair, gray eyes, and a complexion very similar to Kasara's. Kasara was at their house visiting. "Why?" asked. Nadine shrugged her shoulders. "Well, You and him have been writing back and forth to each other for months now. I would think that he would tell you what he looked like, she said. Brandon said nothing, but smiled as he stretched out his long legs as he leaned back in the recliner that he was sitting in. Kasara turned her head and looked at Brandon. Do something about your wife, Kasara jokingly said as she smiled. Like what? He asked. It shouldn't surprise you that she would ask a question like that, Brandon added. Kasara just shook her head. So what does he look like? Nadine asked. I don't know, because I haven't asked him, said Kasara. Nadine's eyes widened as she sat up straight. She and Kasara were sitting on the black leather couch that stood in the middle of the living room of hers and Brandon's house. You and this man have been writing to each other for months, and neither of you have told each other what the other looks like. Nadine said in a stunned tone. What the fuck is the problem? She asked. Brandon laughed as he pounded his fist into armrest. He was enjoying himself. Kasara turned and looked at Brandon as he continued to laugh. She couldn't help but laugh with him. Brandon, are you okay? Kasara asked as she laughed. Tears were streaming down his face from laughter, along with his face turning red. Oh dear God, I love this woman, said Brandon as he looked at Nadine adoringly. Nadine smiled. I love you too, babe, she said. Kasara just shook her head. This is why you two are made for each other's. You are completely nuts, and he eggs it on, she said to Nadine as she finally regained her composure. Brandon finally pulled himself together and sat up in the recliner. I agree with Nad. Why haven't the two of you, at the very least, exchanged pictures, he asked. I hadn't thought about it, honestly, said Kasara. Maybe you should, said Brandon. I agree. Send him a picture of yourself in something sexy. Maybe a corset and black mini skirt with fishnet pantyhose and stiletto heels. Or better yet, some very risque lingerie, nothing too revealing. Just enough to get him drooling, and maybe help him sleep at night, if you get my meaning, said Nadine. Kasara's eyes widened in shock as Brandon bursted into laughter again. Nad, have you lost your mind? Asked. Brandon pounded his fist into the armrest again as Nadine shrugged her shoulders. No, I haven't, she said with a smile. Kasara could do nothing but palm her face as she shook her head. Babe, I don't think that Cass is feeling that idea, said Brandon as he continued to laugh. No, I am not, Kasara said as she started to laugh. This woman is nuts, she added. Come on, it's not a bad idea, said Nadine as she smiled while laughing. Kasara just gave Nadine a look. Listen up, crazy chick, said Kasara as she smiled and Brandon still laughing. I am not doing anything of sort. Granted that I am single, but I am not desperate, geez, she said. Brandon was still laughing and almost fell out of the recliner when the doorbell rang. I'll get it, said Brandon as he got up and walked over to the door, regaining his composure. Who is it? He asked. Hola, said a voice. Carmina's here, said Brandon as he opened the door. Carmina Torres was the same height as Kasara and Nadine. Her hair and eye color were the same as Kasara's. However, Carmina's hair was chin length, and she was not as curvy as Kasara. Her complexion was also slightly darker. What is going? Carmina asked as she walked in, and Brandon closed the door. Nadine is suggesting that I take a risque picture of myself and send it to David, the soldier that I am corresponding with, said Kasara. Carmina raised an eyebrow. Okay, the picture suggestion isn't bad. However, I would not go the risque route, she said. Why not? Seriously? We are talking about a man who's stationed in South Asia. Probably not a lot of sexy women around. I think he would appreciate something to give him sweet dreams and something to look forward to when he comes home, said Nadine. Kasara and Carmina both palmed their faces as Brandon laughed again. Nadine, not happening, said Kasara. Nadine shrugged her shoulders. Just a thought, she said with a smile. Some time later, Kasara and Carmina arrived back at Kasara's apartment. Like I asked, Nad, have you lost your mind? Kasara asked. What? I don't think sending him pictures would be a bad idea. Nothing risque, just two simply beautiful pictures, a headshot and a head-to-toe shot. I'll take the pictures, said Carmina. You know that I don't like having my picture taken. There's only been a few pictures taken of me that I actually like, said Kasara. Cass, trust me. You will be beautiful, said Carmina. You're not going to put me in something fancy, are you? Asked. No, said Carmina. Kasara breathed a sigh of relief. Good, because I don't want him to think that I am some fancy lady who is only writing to him out of boredom, she said. Carmina smiled. Don't worry, Cuzzy. You will be simply beautiful, she said. Kasara smiled, as uneasy smile at Carmina. The next day, Kasara was at Carmina's one-story, three-bedroom house. She had turned one of the rooms into a photography room, complete with lighting, a dressing table with hair styling tools and products and cosmetics. Kasara wore a simple light pink strapless dress that went to her knees and fitted to her body. She opted to wear black heels that were not stilettos. Carmina did her hair and makeup and directed Kasara sit on a low stool that was in front of a white background. Kasara straightened up her back as she crossed her legs. Carmina had the camera and lighting already set up. All she needed to do was make a few adjustments. All right, are you ready, Cass? Carmina asked. Kasara took a deep breath and exhaled. Yeah, I am ready, she said. Carmina took 2 headshots and then asked Kasara to stand. She placed a dark gray pillar next to Kasara and posed her in a way that the picture would be taken slightly from the side, but the front was noticeable. Carmina took 3 head-to-toe shots, and once the pictures were taken, she pulled them up on her computer. Kasara chose the 2 best pictures in the 5x10 size, and Carmina printed them out on her photo printer. See? Simply beautiful, said Carmina. Kasara smiled as she looked at the pictures. I hope he likes them. However, I will admit I am a bit nervous about sending them, she said. Why? Carmina asked. What if he doesn't like the way I look? I never told him what I look like, she said. I have a good feeling that he will love these pictures of you, said Carmina as she smiled. Kasara smiled. I hope so, she said. Over in Afghanistan, David and the rest of the platoon arrived back at camp from morning patrol. David was not in a good mood as he had to break up another fight between the same soldiers. This time, he traded foreman to another camp and put Briggs on probation. As the platoon entered the tent, David saw a brown open-end envelope laying on his bunk. Once he removed his gear and his boots, he picked up the envelope and saw that it was from Kasara, and he smiled. He laid back on his bunk and opened the envelope and pulled out the letter and read it. Dear David, all is going well here. I have gotten a new car thanks to my uncle. Nothing fancy, but definitely better than my last car. Also, I am now working at another law office. This one is smaller and thus less drama. I am still praying for you and your fellow soldiers. I try to watch the news to keep up with what is going on, but I find it hard to watch because it is so depressing. I rather just not watch the news and just keep hope that you and your fellow soldiers are okay. I have written a new romantic short story. This one involving a jewel thief who falls for another jewel thief who is a rival. My friend Nadine gave me the idea, although she suggested that I get sexually graphic, for which I thought she was completely nuts. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind some steamy scenes. I write them all the time in my romantic stories. However, her suggestions edged towards overboard. I have enclosed 2 pictures of myself. My cousin, Carmina, took them as she is a travel photographer and writer. I hope that you like them. You and your fellow soldiers are continually in my prayers. God bless you and stay safe. Sincerely, Kasara Collins. David reached into the envelope and pulled out the 2 pictures that Kasara sent. He smiled. You are beautiful, Kasara, he said. Hey, Lieutenant, who's the hot piece of ass, said Briggs as he sat next to him and looked at the pictures of Kasara. Her name is Kasara Collins. I've been corresponding with her through encouragement for the soldiers, and show some respect, David said to him. Briggs snickered. Lieutenant, you know that mostly desperate, lonely, and bored women join organization like that with the hopes of meeting some hunky military man who will punish them in bed, he said. Briggs, don't you have anything else to do? David asked. Nope, he said as he tried to take one of Kasara's pictures. David immediately grabbed his wrist and squeezed it. Ow! Briggs screamed. Show some respect. David said with authority as he released Briggs' wrist. "You must be hard up, Lieutenant," said Briggs as he stood up and rubbed his wrist. David stood up, walked over to the other side of his bunk and grabbed Briggs by his ear and dragged him outside the tent. Briggs screamed in pain. Once they were outside, David called all the soldiers to attention as he let go of Briggs' ear. "Briggs here thinks that I am hard up all because of a woman that I have been corresponding with. He thinks that she is lonely, bored, and desperate. Now I ask of all of you, what is the one thing that keeps all of you going?" he asked. "Hope, sir," the soldiers said in unison. "Is hope a bad thing?" he asked. "No, sir," the soldiers replied. "Is hope a weakness?" he asked. "No, sir," the soldiers replied. David got into Briggs' face. "Do you have hope, Briggs? Do you look up at the sky at night and hope that one day that you will be able to go home and see your family? Do you have hope that when you go into battle that you will make it out alive? Do you?" David asked. "I don't see what hope has to do with." Briggs started to say. "Answer the question, soldier," said David. Briggs had to swallow before he answered. "Yes, sir. I do have hope that I will see my family soon," said Briggs as he started to shake. "Well, good, because it is hope that keeps one going. Hope can come from anywhere, from a fellow soldier, from reading a passage in the Bible, even from a woman who only wants to give a soldier who has seen and experienced the horrors of war some kind and genuine words of encouragement of hope. It doesn't matter if she has a pretty face. It is the kind soul within that I see, and that is what gives me hope," said David. He backed away, turned on his heel, and walked back into the tent. The rest of the soldiers just looked at Briggs, and then one by one walked away, many of them shaking their heads at Briggs' stupidity. One of the soldiers, named Connors, walked up to Briggs. "You're a fucking idiot, Briggs," he said. "He's corresponding with a woman who is clearly desperate, lonely, and bored," said Briggs. "And what about you, Briggs? Aren't you desperate, lonely, and bored?" "Aren't we all?" said Connors. Briggs said nothing. "If you spent less time being a bored, immature brat and more time being a mature and valued member of this unit, you might just get somewhere and actually earn some genuine respect from everyone," said Connors, and he walked away. 6. Back in the States, Kasara is out with Brandon, Nadine, and Carmina at a local restaurant. However, she's not having a good time as one of Brandon's coworkers has joined them, uninvited. Warren Spires was the most obnoxious man that Kasara had ever met. Despite his nice suit, neatly combed, medium brown hair, brown eyes, and tan-skinned, clearly from a tanning salon, Kasara avoided talking to him as much as she could, as did Carmina. Brandon cordially carried on a conversation with him, while Nadine had to bite her tongue whenever Warren made an insensitive comment. "Brandon, your wife and cousins are awfully quiet," said Warren. "That's because we don't like you," said Nadine. Kasara said nothing, and it was the same with Carmina. "Why don't you like me?" Warren asked. "You are crass, stupid, and insensitive. You are so fucking shallow that you have no personality. You have not said one interesting thing since you sat your ass down with us." "Uninvited, may I add," said Nadine. "Well, I was not under the impression that I wasn't welcomed," he said. "You didn't give me a chance to say so," said Brandon. Warren raised an eyebrow and then turned to Carmina and Kasara. "Do you ladies find my company unappealing?" he asked. Kasara immediately stood up. "I'm off to the ladies' room," she said as she walked away. "Same here," said Carmina as she followed suit. "So, Brandon, tell me about your cousins," said Warren with a smile. Brandon smiled, a sardonic smile. "Neither of them are your type," he said. "What makes you say that?" Warren asked. "Clearly, you haven't noticed they are put off by you. Besides, you usually go for women who are interested in clubs, high-end parties, and money. Neither Carmina or Kasara fit that profile," said Brandon. "How do you know?" Warren asked. "Just because you date trashy, wannabe high-class gold diggers does not make you an expert of women in general. You are merely an expert of what you attract because of what you are," said Nadine. Warren narrowed his eyes at Nadine. "Warren, have a good night," said Brandon. Warren stood up and walked away. "He's an asshole," said Nadine. That he is, said Brandon. As Carmina and Kasara were coming back from the ladies' room, Warren stopped them. Ladies, how would the both of you like to see my new Ferrari? He asked with a smile. And no, they said in unison, and they walked away. However, Warren grabbed Kasara's wrist. What in the hell is your problem? Asked. Warren was taken aback by this reaction. What's your fucking problem? He asked. Kasara managed to jerk her wrist free from his hand. Is this how you endear yourself to women? If so, it's not attractive, she said. Warren looked Kasara up and down. He was unimpressed with her red sleeveless A-line dress and black sandal wedges. You know what's not attractive? Looking like you shop at the local discount store, he said with venom as he smirked. Kasara just stared at him. Well, then I guess you are one less oversexed, useless jerk that I have to worry about. Besides, if you are quick to criticize my clothes, then I wouldn't give you the time of day anyway, said Kasara, and she walked away. Warren turned his attention to Carmina. What about you? You seem like a woman of class, he said. Heed these words. Money does not buy one class. Classy as you look, your attitude is trashy and like that of a 16-year-old boy who is trying too hard to be cool, said Carmina, and she walked away. That's fine. There are plenty of women who enjoy my company, said Warren, and he stormed out. If that's the case, then why was here alone, said Nadine as Carmina and Kasara sat down. Brandon snickered. Warren is one of those, as Carmina said, who is trying too hard to be cool. Also, he doesn't have a Ferrari, and that nice suit that he wore came from a discount men's store. He's too broke to afford anything expensive, he said. Nadine raised an eyebrow. Then how in the world did he get access to the luxury sport cars that he's been driving? She asked. Those luxury sport cars belong to his uncle. The very uncle who owns the construction company that he and I work for. He lives with his uncle because, as I said, he's broke. His uncle would wring his neck if he found out that Warren has been driving his cars, said Brandon. Kasara? Carmina and Nadine snickered. Kasara arrived home and immediate went to check the mailbox, as she had not been able to check it all week. After getting her mail, she made her way to her apartment and went inside. As she looked through the mail, she saw an envelope from Afghanistan and smiled. She kicked off her shoes, placed her purse on the table, and walked over to the love seat and sat down with David's letter in her hand. She took a deep breath, opened the envelope, and took out the letter. Dear, it has been a long 2 weeks, and I have finally managed to get around to writing to you. Things here are getting worse. My fellow soldiers and I are practically on edge as the attacks are becoming more frequent. Sadly, 3 good soldiers have been lost, and 2 more are heading home due to severe injuries. The only 2 things keeping me going are faith and remembering your kind words from every letter that you have written to me. I keep your pictures near and look at them often. I have found myself dreaming about you. All wonderful dreams about us meeting one day and possibly having a future together. I know that is probably a foolhardy thing to say, and maybe even to hope for, but it is what keeps me going. I hope that I don't seem pushy. If so, please accept my sincerest apologies. I have enclosed a picture of myself. One of my fellow soldiers is an aspiring photographer, and he's good. He's only 20 years old, so I do worry about him, especially since he's so young. However, he's proven himself time and again to be a valuable soldier and someone to count on. I pray that God pulls him through this, and that he will be able to go home and fulfill his dream of becoming a photographer. As always, I continue to pray for my fellow soldiers, and I, along with everyone in the world, and most of all, I continue to pray for you. I hope that you are doing well and staying safe, and I hope that you like the picture of me. God bless you, beautiful. Looking forward to hearing from you again. Sincerely, Lieutenant David Axeson. Kasara looked inside the envelope and found the picture of David and smiled. He was dressed in a black t-shirt, camo pants, and combat boots. He was standing against a jeep with his arms crossed, and he was smiling, his blue eyes sparkling in the sunlight. You are a handsome man, David Axeson, said Kasara. As she read over the letter, she thought about what David had written. The thought of a possible future with him sounded wonderful. As she looked at his picture, she started to visualize being with him. All kinds of thoughts went through her head. Some of them questions of, would she be willing to move, change her life if necessary? But as she looked at his picture, a feeling washed over her saying, have faith, trust. I am willing to trust, she said. Holy crap. He's hot, said Nadine as she looked at David's picture. She, Brandon, and Carmina were visiting Kasara. Kasara just shook her head as Carmina and Brandon laughed. Nad, can I have the picture back, please? Kasara asked as she snickered at Nadine. Nadine handed the picture back to Kasara. Carmina walked over and looked over Kasara's shoulder at David's picture. He is handsome, Carmina said as she smiled. Yes, he is, said Kasara as she smiled. So, now that the both of you know what the other looks like, when's the wedding? Brandon asked. Kasara looked at Brandon with shock. Brandon, what in the world? She said, the surprise in her voice. Nadine and Carmina just laughed. What? Said Brandon. You mean to tell me that after all these months, 7 months to be exact, that you and David have been writing to each other that the idea of marriage didn't enter either of your minds? He asked. Kasara blushed a deep shade of red. Oh, so there has been talk of marriage, said Nadine as she noticed that Kasara was blushing. Not marriage per se, just possibly a future together, Kasara said as she continued to blush. Same thing, cuz, said Brandon. Kasara smiled a small smile as she continued to blush. So, when's the date? What venue? How many people? And what is theme of the wedding? Brandon asked. Sir. Once again gave Brandon a look of shock as Nadine and Carmina laughed harder. First of all, he only mentioned in the letter of a possible future together. Secondly, I would thank you to be not already be planning the wedding, especially since it's not yours to plan. And lastly, I will let all of you know if anything more is mentioned, Kasara said as she blushed a deeper shade of red. Cass, is it me, or have you fallen in love with him? Carmina asked. I have, but we have not said those words to each other, she said. Not yet, said Brandon. Carmina snickered as Kasara looked at Brandon. Can it? Brandon Mitchell Collins. Kasara said. Oh, said Nadine. The whole name has been spoken, she said with amusement in her voice. Brandon just smirked at Kasara. Just calling as I see it, Kasara Collins, he said. Carmina shook her head. Please no one call my whole name, she said. Carmina Maria Torres, said Nadine with a smile. Carmina narrowed her eyes. Nadine Catherine Bardine Collins, she said. The four of them just bursted into laughter. 7. Over in Afghanistan, David and his fellow soldiers in the Marine camp have been given a satellite to access the internet along with laptop computers. Many of them are excited about this and immediately set everything up. One of the first things that David did was contact his twin brother, Andrew, via Skype. David, said Andrew. Hey bro, said David as he smiled. No mistaking that David and Andrew are twins, with the exception that Andrew does not have a clean-shaven head. How are you doing out there? Andrew asked. Surviving, keeping with my faith has gotten me through it, said David. Amen to that. Things are fine here, but everyone is worried and is praying for you, said Andrew. David smiled. Thanks, I can use all the prayers that I can get. There's so much going on here. The attacks are becoming frequent. We've lost 5 more soldiers, he said. I will keep praying for you and your fellow soldiers, bro, said Andrew. Thanks, said David. Anything else going on? Andrew asked. David sighed as he smiled. Bro, I think no. I feel that I am genuinely in love, he said. Andrew raised an eyebrow. What is her name and how did you meet her? He asked. Her name is Kasara and I have been corresponding with her through encouragement for the soldiers. She is beautiful, smart, and kind. When I read her letters, I feel a genuine connection to her. She always has kind words to say and she prays for me and the others, David said as he smiles. Indeed, it sounds like love. Do you know what she looks like? Andrew asked. Yes, in fact. She sent me 2 pictures of her. Nothing over the top or flashy, said David as he took the headshot picture of Kasara and placed in front of the webcam so that Andrew could see it. Andrew smiled. She's beautiful. Have you spoken to her yet? He asked. Not yet. I'm going to contact encouragement for the soldiers and see if she and I will be able to chat since they have set up a video chat feature, said David. Well, good, and let me know the date of the wedding, Andrew said. David smiled. We haven't gotten that far. However, I am thinking about asking her to marry me, he said. Well, do it. I have a feeling that she won't say no, Andrew said with a smile. And you know this how? David asked as he smirked. Call it a hunch, said Andrew. After talking to Andrew for 20 minutes more, their Skype chat ended. As David sat there, the thought of asking Kasara to marry him was going through his mind. He was seriously considering it and finally made a decision. In the States, Kasara just happened to be at her computer when she got a notice that she had received an email from encouragement for the soldiers. She went to her email and opened it. Dear Kasara Collins, we, here at Encouragement for the Soldiers, are always researching into how we can bring our letter-writing members closer to the soldiers that they are corresponding with it. We are proud to introduce a new feature, face-to-face. This feature is a video chat that will allow members to chat with the soldier that they are writing to. If you have ever wanted to video chat with a soldier that you are corresponding with and get to know them better, face-to-face will allow for you to do that. FYI, the soldier that you are corresponding with, Lieutenant David Axeson, has signed up for face-to-face. If you would like to video chat with him, please click this link. At the bottom was a link. Kasara's heart raced as she debated whether or not to video chat with David. She took a deep breath and clicked on the link. As the screen loaded, Kasara turned on her webcam. She would thank Carmina later for convincing her to buy it. She quickly ran into the bedroom, making sure that her hair looked okay, and glided tinted lip gloss on her lips. Once that was done, she quickly went back into the living room and sat down at her desk. The screen was still loading, so she took the opportunity to calm herself by breathing deeply. Soon the screen finished loading, and right before her eyes, Lieutenant David Axeson. David, said Kasara. Said David. Kasara smiled. Yes, she said. David took a breath and smiled. You are so beautiful, and I finally get to speak to you, he said. Thank you, and you are quite handsome. I'm happy that we are finally speaking, she said. How are you doing? Asked. I'm doing well. My fellow soldiers and I are on high alert due to the frequent attacks, said David. I've been watching the news about those attacks. I am always praying for you, said Kasara. Thank you, I greatly appreciate it, David said with a smile. Kasara smiled back. So, what else has been going on? Asked. Well, now that we have satellite, many of us have been sending emails to family and friends. Some of us have been video chatting with family and friends. I finally got to speak to my brother after 8 months, said David. Kasara smiled. That's good, she said. How is he doing, she asked. He's doing well. He and the rest of our family and friends are worried about me and praying for me, said David. Hopefully, you will be able to go home soon, said Kasara. Yes, and speaking about that, said David. Suddenly, an alarm could be heard going off. David, what's going on? Kasara asked worriedly. Another attack? Pray for me, babe, said David. I will, said Kasara, and the video chat abruptly ended. Kasara started to cry as she clasped her hands together and started praying for David and his fellow soldiers. After the prayer, a feeling came over her that said, he will be fine. An hour later, a feeling nudged at Kasara to return to the computer, and she logged into her account with encouragement for the soldiers. She did so and found that David had left a message for her. When you get this, contact me on Skype, and he left his Skype ID. Kasara quickly wrote it down and logged onto Skype and typed in his Skype ID and immediately connected with him. The Skype screen chimed for a bit, and then David appeared on the screen. David, are you okay? Kasara asked, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I am fine. Sorry that I had to leave so abruptly, he said. Don't apologize. I'm just glad that you are alive, said Kasara as she wiped her tears. Were there any casualties? She asked. Sadly, yes. We lost 7 people, David said solemnly. My condolences, said Kasara. Thank you, said David as tears fell from his eyes. As Kasara looked at him, more tears also fell from her eyes. She could feel David's pain, despite not being there. She also realized that she is indeed in love with him. "David, can I tell you something?" she asked. "Sure thing, what is it?" he said. "I love you. I am in love with you," Kasara said as tears continued to fall from her eyes. David smiled. "I have a confession to make. I feel the same way. In fact, I wanted to ask you something," he said. "What is it?" she asked. "Kasara Collins, will you marry me?" Kasara's eyes widened as more tears fell from her eyes. She smiled at him. "Yes, David, I will marry you," she said. David smiled at her. "I love you, baby," he said. Kasara smiled. "I love you too, baby," she said as tears continued to fall. 8. Denver, Co. Kasara, along with Carmina, Brandon, and Nadine, waited along with others for the arrival of the Marines returning from Afghanistan. Kasara was dressed in a pink short-sleeve blouse, a black pencil skirt, and black heels. Her hair was straightened, and her makeup beautifully simple. In her hands was a rectangular box, which contained David's gift. "Nervous, Cass," said Nadine. "Very," said Kasara. "But I am also very excited," she said. Soon a huge airplane arrived, and everyone waited in anticipation for it to come to a stop. Once it did, all the soldiers emerged from the airplane, and many of their loved ones ran up to greet them. Kasara nervously looked around for David amongst the crowd. "Let's split up," said Brandon. "Okay," said Kasara. She and Carmina went one way, and Brandon and Nadine went the other way as they walked amongst the crowd. Kasara's heart was beating fast as many thoughts went through her mind. She prayed that David was there and that she would find him. David stepped off the plane with the rest of the soldiers. He, too, was hoping and praying that Kasara was there. He held the image of her face in his mind. He soon saw a woman wearing a pink blouse, black pencil skirt, and heels. His heart started to beat frenetically as he quickly, but cautiously made his way over to her. "Kasara," he called out. Kasara turned and looked to see at who called her name. She stood there for a moment and then spoke. "David," she said. David smiled. "Hey, baby," he said. "David," Kasara said as she rushed over to him and threw her arms around his neck. David dropped his gear as he wrapped his arms around Kasara's waist and hugged her. They looked at each other as tears fell from both of their eyes. "Hey, baby," she said, and then they passionately kissed. Carmina stood there smiling as tears fell from her eyes. Brandon and Nadine soon joined her and smiled. "I take it that's him," said Brandon. "Yep," said Carmina. After kissing for what seemed like forever, David and Kasara broke the kiss and looked at each other. "Baby, you are so beautiful." "I'm glad that you came," said David as tears continued to fall from his eyes. "Me too, and I have a gift for you," she said as she handed him the box. David took the box, opened it, and found that it was a gold cross. He looked up and smiled at her. "Thank you, baby," he said. "You're welcome," she said. "I have a gift for you also. I took a short detour through England to pick it up," he said as he kneeled down and unzipped a small pocket on one of his bags. He reached in and pulled out a black velvet ring box, and then turned to Kasara. He opened the ring box, and inside was a beautiful diamond ring. Kasara's eyes widened with surprise. "I know that I asked you before, but I want to do it right. Kasara Collins, will you marry me?" David asked. Tears fell from Kasara's eyes. "Yes, I will marry you," she said as tears streamed down her face. David placed the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. He stood up, and they kissed again. Carmina, Brandon, and Nadine cheered, as did others who had been looking on. Once again, David and Kasara broke the kiss. "David, there are 3 people who are wanting to meet you," said Kasara, and she turned to Carmina, Brandon, and Nadine, and waved them over and introduced them. "I am honored to be meeting all of you. Kasara has told me all about the 3 of you," said David. "I hope she was kind," Nadine said with a hint of humor. David smirked as Kasara giggled as she leaned into his arms. "For the most part, she did warn me about you though, and I believe her when said that you are nuts," he said with a smile. Brandon and Carmina laughed. "I'm not that bad," Nadine said with a playful pout. "Ahem," said Carmina, and everyone laughed. As my wife says, she's actually not that bad, said Brandon. Also, I wanted to let you know that if you need a job, Decker Construction is hiring, he said. David smiled. Thank you, he said. So, what now? Carmina asked. David and Kasara looked at each other. We get married, she said. Finale. The wedding was huge and held in a very classy venue in Fort Worth. David's family and Kasara's family watched as David and Kasara exchanged vows. Kasara was dressed in a strapless, white dress that reached to her ankles and white heels. David was dressed in a light blue dress shirt, light gray vest, matching pants, and black shoes. Kasara's uncle, Chase Torres, who is an ordained minister, officiated the wedding. By the power invested in me by God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride, said Chase. Kasara and David smiled at each other and passionately kissed as everyone cheered. They soon turned to everyone as Chase said, I am honored to present to all of you, David and Kasara Axeson. More cheers erupted as Kasara and David made their way down the aisle under a shower of white and light pink rose petals. At the reception, many gave congrats to David and Kasara. Many stood up and made a toast to them. Soon David stood up. Everyone, may I have your attention, please, he said, and the entire room went silent. This has been a joyous day for Kasara and I. We give thanks to those who were able to make it, and for those in heaven who are looking down on us, he said. Here, everyone said. David turned to Kasara. Baby, I don't think there are enough words in the world to express of how happy you have made me. The lonely nights in the military camp, hoping and praying to God to keep me and my fellow soldiers safe. The words from you that gave me comfort and kept me going. Only one thing was on my mind once I saw your face. To spend my life with you, to share everything with you, my hopes, my dreams, everything. You are my other half, baby, the half that I have been looking for, and now we are together. I give thanks to God for bringing you into my life, and that we are now together. I love you, he said as tears fell from his eyes. Kasara stood up as tears fell from her eyes, and she kissed him. I feel the same way. Every night since we started corresponding, I always prayed that you and your fellow soldiers were okay, that every letter that I sent would always reach you. From the moment I saw your face, I saw a future with you, and here we are. You are safe, you are alive, and we are together. I, too, give thanks to God for bringing us together. I love you, baby, she said. There was not a dry eye amongst the guests. David's brother, Andrew, stepped forward with a glass of champagne in his hand and raised it. To David and Kasara, to God bringing them together. Many blessings to both of you. God bless, he said. God bless, everyone said. I love you, baby, said David. I love you, too, baby, said Kasara, and they kissed once again.